If you ordered something online today, there's a very real chance that Amazon delivered it, processed the payment, handled the recommendation, or quietly powered the infrastructure behind the website you used. For most people, Amazon is no longer a brand in the traditional sense. It's an expectation, a default, a system so deeply woven into everyday life that it barely registers as a choice anymore. For more than 2 decades, Amazon didn't just sell products. It trained the world to think differently about time, convenience, and value. Waiting became unacceptable. Selection became infinite. Prices became something customers assumed would always be lower somewhere inside Amazon's ecosystem. And for a long time, that assumption was correct. Amazon grew into a machine that seemed immune to economic cycles, competition, and even public criticism. It absorbed losses where others would collapse. It expanded while competitors retreated. It survived moments that would have broken smaller companies. But as we move deeper into 2026, something fundamental is changing. Not in a dramatic, headline-grabbing collapse, but in a slow, measurable erosion of control. The very system that once made Amazon unstoppable is becoming harder to manage, more expensive to maintain, and less capable of adapting to a world that no longer behaves the way it once did. This is not a story about Amazon failing. It's a story about why Amazon's dominance no longer feels inevitable. Amazon's rise was never just about selling things online. From the beginning, Jeff Bezos understood something most retailers didn't. Scale itself could become a weapon. The more customers Amazon attracted, the more data it collected. The more data it collected, the better it became at predicting behavior. And the better it predicted behavior, the harder it became to compete. Instead of maximizing short-term profit, Amazon invested relentlessly in infrastructure. Warehouses appeared closer to cities. Delivery routes were optimized down to minutes. Inventory systems were tuned to anticipate demand before customers consciously expressed it. Over time, Amazon stopped reacting to consumer behavior and began shaping it. Prime accelerated this shift. What started as a shipping subscription quietly transformed into a psychological commitment. Once customers paid the annual fee, every purchase felt cheaper, faster, and easier by default. Comparison shopping faded. Brand loyalty weakened. Amazon became the starting point, and often the end point, of online commerce. At the same time, Amazon Web Services grew into something even more powerful. While retail attracted attention, AWS became the backbone of the modern internet. Startups, corporations, governments, and media platforms all relied on Amazon's servers to function. This wasn't just a side business. It was the profit engine that funded Amazon's ambition to expand everywhere, absorb losses, and outlast competitors. For years, this system worked because the world itself was expanding alongside Amazon. Demand kept rising. Globalization accelerated. Digital commerce exploded. But systems built for endless growth eventually meet a different kind of reality. Scale is powerful, but it comes with a cost. As Amazon grew larger, its operations became more complex, more interconnected, and more fragile. Running a global logistics network means absorbing shocks from labor markets, fuel prices, regulation, and consumer behavior, all at once. By the mid-2000s, those pressures intensified. Labor costs rose across developed economies. Transportation became more expensive. Regulatory scrutiny increased, particularly around worker conditions and market dominance. What once felt like marginal cost increases began to compound into structural pressure. Prime, once Amazon's most effective loyalty engine, began to show signs of fatigue. Subscription growth slowed. Price increases became more visible. Customers started to ask whether faster shipping alone justified the cost, especially as inflation reshaped household budgets. Convenience was still valued, but not at any price. At the same time, consumer behavior shifted. Shoppers became more deliberate. They compared again. They searched alternatives. They discovered that Amazon no longer always offered the lowest price or the best experience. Amazon wasn't losing customers en masse, it was losing unquestioned loyalty, and that distinction is critical. For years, competitors tried to copy Amazon directly, and most failed. But eventually, they stopped copying and started adapting. Walmart leveraged its physical stores to offer faster same-day pickup. Shopify empowered brands to bypass marketplaces entirely and own their customer relationships. Regional players optimized for local markets Amazon struggled to understand at scale. What changed wasn't Amazon's capability, but its relative advantage. When everyone learns your playbook, scale alone is no longer enough. In cloud computing, the pressure became even more visible. AWS still leads, but Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud closed the gap by targeting enterprise clients with specialized tools, flexible pricing, and integrated ecosystems. For the first time, large customers began deliberately diversifying, remind themselves that relying on one provider carried risk. Amazon remained dominant, but dominance no longer meant inevitability. As external pressure mounted, Amazon's internal language changed. The company that once celebrated expansion began talking about efficiency, discipline, and focus. Layoffs swept through corporate divisions. Experimental projects were quietly shelved. Growth targets were recalibrated. This wasn't panic, it was recognition. But recognition comes with consequences. A culture built on constant expansion doesn't always transition smoothly into one focused on consolidation. Decision-making slows, risk tolerance drops, innovation becomes more cautious. The company begins asking not how much it can grow, but which parts of the empire are worth defending. AWS, long considered untouchable, became part of that calculation. Growth continued, but margins faced pressure. Customers negotiated harder. Competition intensified. The division that once funded Amazon's retail ambitions could no longer do so without limits. Amazon was no longer operating in a world that rewarded expansion at any cost. To regain control, Amazon leaned heavily into automation and artificial intelligence. Warehouses filled with robots. Algorithms optimized pricing, logistics, and inventory. AI systems promised to reduce waste, increase speed, and restore efficiency. On paper, the strategy was logical. Automation scales, AI optimizes, costs should fall. In practice, the transition has been far more complex. Highly optimized systems can become brittle. When everything is tuned for efficiency, flexibility disappears. Small disruptions cascade through massive networks. Errors propagate at scale. And while automation improves internal metrics, customers don't always feel the benefit. Faster fulfillment means little if prices rise. Smarter recommendations lose value if trust erodes. AI becomes invisible until it fails. Amazon is betting that automation will restore its edge, but the return on that bet remains uncertain. What makes Amazon's current situation particularly difficult is that the company is no longer fighting a single problem, but a combination of pressures that reinforce each other. Rising costs would be manageable on their own. Slowing growth could be offset by efficiency. Competition could be fought with innovation. But when all of these forces collide at the same time, even a company of Amazon's size begins to feel constrained. One of the most underestimated challenges is organizational inertia. Amazon's systems were designed for a world where expansion was always the answer. More warehouses solved delivery problems. More Prime benefits increased loyalty. More AWS services drove higher margins. But in a world where growth slows, those same systems become harder to adjust. Infrastructure that once enabled speed now demands constant maintenance. Logistics networks optimized for scale struggle to downsize without friction, and decision-making processes built for aggressive expansion adapt poorly to restraint. Internally, this creates tension. Teams that were rewarded for growth are now evaluated on cost discipline. Long-term bets face greater scrutiny. Innovation becomes incremental rather than bold. None of this means Amazon has lost its talent or ambition, but it does signal a shift in mindset that is difficult to reverse once it takes hold. At the same time, Amazon faces a growing trust problem that rarely makes headlines. Customers still use the platform, but their relationship with it has changed. Complaints about counterfeit products, inconsistent quality, and unreliable third-party sellers have become more common. What was once perceived as a curated marketplace increasingly feels like a vast, unfiltered catalog. Convenience remains, but confidence erodes slowly, and erosion is far more dangerous than outrage because it happens quietly. This trust issue also affects sellers. Many merchants still rely on Amazon for reach, but fear its power at the same time. Fees have increased. Competition with Amazon's own private labels remains a concern, and algorithm changes can alter visibility overnight. The result is a marketplace where dependency replaces partnership and dependency breeds resentment. Meanwhile, regulators around the world continue to examine Amazon's influence. Antitrust investigations don't need to result in dramatic breakups to be effective. Even the threat of regulation alters behavior. Expansion plans slow. Acquisitions face resistance. Strategic options narrow. Amazon must now operate under the assumption that its size is no longer an unquestioned advantage, but a liability that attracts scrutiny. All of this unfolds as Amazon tries to reposition itself for the next technological cycle. Artificial intelligence is central to that strategy, but AI is not a shortcut. It requires data, trust, and time. It introduces new risks around bias, errors, and accountability. And most importantly, it does not eliminate the fundamental tension between efficiency and resilience. The paradox Amazon faces is simple but profound. The more optimized the system becomes, the less forgiving it is when conditions change. Speed and efficiency brought Amazon dominance. Adaptability will determine whether it keeps it. So where does Amazon stand in 2026? It is still enormous, still influential, still deeply embedded in global commerce and infrastructure. But it is no longer operating from a position of unquestioned control. Prime growth has plateaued. Retail margins face constant pressure. AWS competes in a crowded, aggressive market. Costs rise faster than efficiency gains. And the complexity of managing an empire this large introduces risks no algorithm can fully eliminate. Amazon's challenge isn't competition alone. It's managing a system so vast that even small miscalculations ripple across continents. This is not the collapse of Amazon. It's the end of certainty. Whether Amazon adapts successfully will depend not just on technology, but on restraint, on knowing where to invest, where to pull back, and how to operate in a world that no longer bends automatically to scale. What happens next won't just define Amazon's future. It will remind the world that even the largest empires eventually face limits. What makes this moment especially difficult for Amazon is that the company can no longer rely on momentum alone to carry it forward. For the first time in its history, Amazon has to operate in an environment where efficiency gains are incremental, growth is contested, and every strategic move is scrutinized by customers, competitors, and regulators alike. Decisions that once felt obvious now involve trade-offs that didn't exist before, forcing the company to balance speed against stability, expansion against restraint, and innovation against risk. This shift doesn't weaken Amazon overnight, but it fundamentally changes how the company must think about power, scale, and control in the years ahead. And once a company reaches that stage, the rules it once wrote for others no longer apply in quite the same way. And Amazon isn't the only giant facing this kind of quiet pressure. Across the tech world, other companies that once seemed untouchable are beginning to run into similar limits. Not because they failed, but because the systems that made them powerful no longer work the same way. In the next video, we'll take a closer look at another global tech empire that's starting to lose control, and why its future may be far less secure than most people realize. If you want to understand where the next cracks are forming, make sure you're subscribed, because this story is far from over.